The question is, does America need a governing body to regulate disinformation? Let's start with you, Stuart. Are you a yes or a no on that?
Oh, this one's easy. No.
And Charles?
I'm a no.
And Nina?
I'm a yes.
Okay. And finally, Michael?
No.
All right. So Nina, you're in the 3-against-1 position. But let's start. Our first debater on this one will be Stuart. Again, Stuart, you are a no on the question. Does America need a governing body to regulate disinformation? You have 90 seconds to tell us why.
So the problem with having a government body that tells us what is misinformation and what is not is that governments cannot make those decisions without letting politics interfere in the decision. Government is about politics, and when they decide something is misinformation, it will be informed by their political interests. And I would look at, we talked a little bit about the CDC. When they started offering us advice, we all wanted to believe them, and we wanted to believe that everything they said was true. And the first words out of their mouth practically was, "You don't need a mask." Followed 6 or 8 weeks later by, "Oh yeah, maybe you should get a mask." And the reason they told us we didn't need a mask is because they thought that health workers ought to have the mask. But they didn't tell us that. They didn't say they work, but you shouldn't get them. They said you don't need them. That repeated itself time and again, even with the CDC, even with something like medical information. I think it's really dangerous to ask the government to make these calls across the board.
All right, thank you. I'm going to skip to the yes for a little back and forth. So Nina, your 90 seconds.
Sure. So Stuart, I don't think that that's what the government could or should do. I don't think it should be adjudicating whether something is true or false, and I don't think it should be asking any speech to be removed. I think before we talk about any regulation, we need to talk about transparency and oversight. Frankly, I am shocked and ask myself every day, how is it that an industry with such power, like social media, with such an impact on our everyday personal and professional lives, we don't know how it works, really. What we know about it comes from researchers like me, based on the data that the social media platforms give us access to, and whistleblowers. I believe what we need is a federal internet commission, kind of like we have the FCC and the FAA. If a plane's crashing over and over, we're going to go investigate that airline, right? I think we've had a lot of plane crashes with social media. And I think we need to make effective policy based on, frankly, information that is unbiased. Right now, we have so much polarization over what's going on with social media that we need to kind of pull back the lid and understand that a little bit more. And again, this wouldn't be about removing speech. It would be about understanding the algorithms that Secretary Chertoff mentioned before. It would be understanding the business practices and the content moderation decisions that are made. I believe all Americans need to know that, and it would increase the trust that Charles was talking about before. So that is what that regulatory body would do, in my opinion, and then eventually enforce some rules that would come later down the pike.
Charles, it is your turn. You are a no.
I can't believe I'm saying this. I agree with Stuart Baker. I think Stuart is absolutely right. He's spot on. Do we really want to add another layer of bureaucracy on the already, bureaucratic United States government? That's number one. Second, Nina mentions polarization. So who are going to be the arbiters of truth here, right? How are we going to honestly determine what's true or what's not, especially in 2022? I think you honestly would have an easier time mopping the ocean than getting individuals to decide together what's true or what's not. So that's where I stand.
All right, thank you, Nina. I'm going to again give you 45 seconds to respond to what you've just said, because you're in this 3-against-1 position. And I found it interesting that you said you want information that's unbiased. Who decides that?
Yeah. So, again, we have professionals who understand aviation and communications who are regulating that space, right? I think when we have, let's say, like the UK does, Ofcom, the Office of Communications, that is going to be soon moderating online safety in the UK. The professionals are able to do that. They are going to be civil servants. They are going to be faceless, and they're going to, go forward and look at the what's changing on the algorithms, what's changing in the content moderation policies. I think, again, we all deserve to know that. Before we can even have a conversation about what's true or false online, we need to pull back that lid.
Michael Chertoff, you are a no.
So full disclosure, I co-chaired a committee for the Homeland Security Advisory Council that actually recommended not having a governance board at DHS for disinformation.
Thank you. We appreciate the disclosure. Thank you.
And I agree with the fact that we don't want to have the government telling us what is true or not true, or disinformation or not disinformation. Here's a thought experiment. Imagine Donald Trump is appointing the members of that board, and every time someone puts something online that he lost the election in 2020, it has to get taken down. I mean, we could live under Putin if we wanted to live that kind of experience. We don't need to live it in the U.S. Now, that doesn't mean there can't be any rules. I think you could have Congress create neutral rules, for example, saying things like you have to disclose who actually posted something, or you have to disclose your algorithms, or you have to disclose what your terms of service are. But those would be rules of general application. They would not be rules that are designed to govern the content of the information you put on.
But who would enforce the rules?
Well, the answer is if you violated the rule, if it was a statute, then presumably the Department of Justice would sue you, get an injunction or something of that sort. I mean, there are civil ways you can do that. But the point is, it wouldn't be about content. It would be about disclosure and transparency.
Okay, well, let's mix it up. Let's start the conversation. Nina.
I got to clear something up here, Secretary Chertoff, and I'm hesitant to even open this can of worms. But so
Are
full
you
disclosure.
sure about this?
Huh? Yes, I'm sure.
Okay.
I'm going to do it. Full disclosure: I was the chair, the executive director of the Disinformation Governance Board, and the Disinformation Governance Board was never going to tell people what was true or false online. It was an internal coordination body meant to, as you all know, DHS is a huge, sprawling organization meant to herd some government cats. That's all it was meant to do. And the fact that we're even talking about today that it might have decided what was true or false online is extremely sad to me.
No, and you're absolutely right. And the reason we decided to actually suggest it not be used is because the title of it, Governance Board, conveyed a misimpression.
Sure.
Having the government coordinate to play by the rules is appropriate, but having something that suggests, even erroneously, that the government's going to govern speech is a very bad idea.
Yeah, the name was bad. I did not come up with it. But, the fact that then, we said, all right, we're not going to put this body forward and address this issue within the Department of Homeland Security, which has so many equities that cover, disinformation at the border related to natural disasters with our elections. It was a very sad moment for
All right,
me.
I got to get Stuart and Charles into
Yep.
this. So Stuart, you made a sort of philosophical argument. Well, it's also a practical argument. You just said the government can't be doing politics. And Charles, you also made a practical argument that we just don't need one more layer of bureaucracy. So let's dig a little bit into what you're talking about, and again, let Nina respond. So why don't you take that first, Charles?
Sure. So this would be a hard sell to the American people in this day of age, given how politically divisive our nation is, right? No matter how you define it, how you spin it, at the end of the day, there are going to be certain aspects of the American populace that will call this the truth police. That's going to be the perception. And for many, perception is the reality. Then on top of that, you're going to formally establish this within the United States government. So then we have to ask ourselves, okay, how is oversight going to be conducted on this? How can we possibly be unbiased in conducting oversight and trying to regulate disinformation? You're going to open up a can of worms here by establishing this, and then it's going to be a real sticky situation, because I don't see how you reconcile this with protecting our First Amendment.
All right, let's stack up some no's before we come back to you, Nina. So Stuart.
So, Nina, with deepest sympathy, I want to say welcome to Washington. You didn't deserve what happened to you, but the reason it happened is not because coordination of rumor control is a bad thing, but because in the last 10 years, it's not just what the government is saying, which we've all learned to listen to the government and to take it with a grain of salt, to ask, well, what's their motivation in telling us this in particular? And we're all comfortable with that. But we're not comfortable with the idea that no one can say anything that contradicts it, which is unfortunately under the rule of the 4 companies, pretty much how they administer their misinformation practices. And that's why it provoked such a reaction. And we shouldn't be in the business of saying this is what can't be said. And I'm afraid people understandably read it that way.
And I understand that people are rightfully skeptical of government intervention in this area. Again, that's not what I think should happen, could happen, wouldn't have taken the job if that were the description. And frankly, it happened because of a poor communications effort on DHS's part. But I want to talk a little bit more about what Charles was saying, that this isn't about, you don't want another layer of bureaucracy here. I think we actually do need a little bit more bureaucracy in coordinating the efforts of our government related to counter-disinformation activities. Right now, they are happening in parallel across the government, at the DOJ, within the IC, at the Department of State. The countries that are doing good work in this area, which you can read about in my book.
You wouldn't want to mention the title of your book.
How to Lose the Information War.
Yeah.
The countries that are doing good work in this area have a belly button in government that is coordinating them. They have regular kind of fusion cell meetings where they're all talking about what they're doing rather than working cross-purpose. And I am sad that it has taken us 6 years to kind of just be in stasis. Since 2016, we've not made a lot of progress in this area. The companies are actually doing a whole lot more than the US government is in terms of countering disinformation, both from foreign and domestic sources. So that's another area that I think we could explore more. It's not about removing speech. It is about, making things work inside of government, and I think we need a little bit more of that. We got to talk to each other more.
Michael,
if I may,
Charles, please.
we can certainly collaborate and increase cooperation without adding layers of bureaucracy, right? We've seen this play downrange overseas with General McChrystal and how we revolutionized the establishment of JOCs and how we go after hard targets, removing terrorists from the battlefield, having operators next to intel analysts, next to geospatial analysts, and it works really well. I think we can do that just without, formally adding just another layer of government operations to that extent.
Well, where we left it at DHS was to encourage coordination among the existing institutions, including the General Counsel and the privacy. But, one thing is when you create a new organization, as Charles has suggested, it winds up looking for a mission. And the area of free speech is an area that's really fraught in this respect. One thing I will also observe to people, this is not a new problem. Go back to the founding of the nation. The Burr-Hamilton duel was fought over scurrilous newspaper articles accusing one of the combatants of fathering an illegitimate child. This kind of news has always been out there, and we've relied upon the First Amendment as the principal defender. Now, again, I'll emphasize where that has changed is the use of algorithms, because algorithms allow you to turbocharge misinformation by using data that has been taken or purchased or even stolen from you in order to figure out what are your particular hot buttons. And that's an area where I do think there is more room for some kind of rule or regulation as opposed to the content itself.
So do you have something, sort of a concept for that?
Yeah, the concept would be simply to require the disclosure of data that is taken from private individuals that is being used to communicate information to them, and also disclosure so researchers can look at algorithms. So there could be a way of people understanding I'm getting this message because someone has looked at all my job searches or all my online searches for the last year, and they figured out I'm looking for a particular job.
Nina, would that be enough?
No, I mean, what we're talking about there is essentially micro-targeting, right? And that's part of the problem. That's part of the problem, but it's not the entirety of the problem. A lot of times what we see is networked disinformation, where there is coordination and amplification of the most enraging material. People are knowingly lying because they know the most engaging content online is the most enraging content, right? That gets more at the algorithmic question there. Should the companies be promoting things that are inciting violence and hatred that are based in lies. But it's a broader question than either one of those two things. And again, I think when it comes to questions of public safety, public health, and the functioning of our democracy, there is that responsibility that we were talking about before, and someone needs to conduct the oversight about the content moderation decisions that are being made not only by algorithms, but by humans. Then we won't have this polarization, this Ministry of Truth conversation, because we'll be able to pull back the lid and see what's going on.
Stuart, it looks like you're ready to jump
Yeah,
in.
so do you want to change your vote to no on the first one? Because that's where I was on the first question, that we cannot live with the status quo on content moderation with 4 companies doing this without the kind of oversight that lets us see exactly what they're doing and requires fairness and non-discrimination on their policies.
Well, then it sounds like you want to moderate content, though, Stuart.
No, I want I want to moderate the moderators.
I think we need both. How about that?
We're going to go to a question in a moment. Is anybody ready to jump in? See you in the front row. Suzanne. But if you could, for the radio audience, tell us who you are.
Suzanne Spalding from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. I want to ask how this relates now to our ongoing election and the upcoming election in 2024. If you take the position, I mean, I think, first of all, do you think that Putin might be tempted?
You get one question, so make sure this is the one that you want to ask.
Do you think Putin might be tempted to jump in and spread disinformation, undermining public trust in the legitimacy of the outcome of the election, thereby frustrating the peaceful transition of power? And are we then unilaterally disarming if we say the platforms can't do anything to moderate that, and the government should be hands off?
No, well, could I get you to restate it? Because to take the question they're doing right now is whether the government should be regulating. So you had it at the end there, but otherwise perfect.